Today we're going to be answering your 10 questions on camera settings. Dun, dun, dun. Hey guys, and welcome to Phlearn. My name is Aaron Nace. You can find us on Twitter at Phlearn. Joining me in the studio is the wonderful Kat Filipinos.
Hey guys.
How you doing today, Kat?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm really good. We've been munching on
Trail mix?
little treats, little adult treats, trail mix, some nuts, some M&Ms, things like that. And we gathered together. It's hard to talk with nuts in your mouth, apparently. Hold on, give me 1 second. We gathered together the top 10 questions you guys had last week on camera settings, and today we're going to be answering those questions to the best of our ability. Keep in mind, this is opinions. Like, these are my opinions. You guys might have different opinions, and that's totally cool. If you guys do have other opinions, opinions that are not our opinions, please just leave them in the comment down below, and then we can get a cool discussion going on. So keep in mind, our opinions, take them with a grain of salt. And yeah, what do you think? You want to go into the questions?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. All right, so this first one is from Thomas Caesar on Facebook. He says, "Hi, what is the difference between different metering modes and how do you use them in different situations? Cheers from France."
Right on. All right, Thomas. I'm going to give you in reference to this camera right here. This is a camera I've been using for quite some time. It's a 5D Mark II Canon. And I'll tell you about the metering modes on this one and what I do, and hopefully that'll help you guys out. So basically, in general, metering modes on the camera. So a camera is like trying to figure out what settings it's going to change in order to get a proper exposure, to not be underexposed or overexposed. But the reason why things can be a little bit tricky, like say, if the camera was photographing like a regular scene in which nothing was like too light or too dark, it does like a really good job with that because there's no like elements that trick the camera. But imagine you have like a backlight coming in. Like, does the camera, is it supposed to expose for the light that's behind it? Or is it actually supposed to make that brighter than the rest of the scene to overexpose? Or like, let's say you're photographing with someone's wearing like really dark pants. Like, does the camera know if you're supposed to like make those pants like lighter to be able to expose, which might blow out the rest of the image? Or does it leave them black? So that's basically why there are a bunch of different metering modes in the camera, because the camera, you have to kind of like figure out, how am I going to figure out this exposure? So the metering modes that are on this camera are, we've got our evaluative metering, we've got partial metering, spot metering, and center weighted average. So evaluative metering is basically, it's going to take the entire image and figure out the light spots and the dark spots, and then kind of like build the histogram from there. So it's going to like figure out where the exposure should be to like try to include the best of the bright spots and the best of the dark spots in the entire image as a whole. That's the one I usually use, so I just keep it there for the most part. I'm using manual mode quite a bit of the time, and when you're using manual mode, you don't really have to worry about the metering so much because you are actually controlling the exposure rather than the camera controlling the exposure. So if you're in manual mode, don't really worry about your metering at all. This is for like P mode, AV mode, or TV mode, which would be like time sensitive or time value aperture, as well as program mode. So the next one we've got is partial metering, and basically this just takes like wherever you focus on in the image, and I could be wrong about this because I don't really use this image much, but I think it's wherever you focus on in the image, it takes like the exposure from that general area and then tries to like match it to that. The next we've got is spot metering, and spot metering will take like just the area that you focus on and like that pinpoint there, and it'll meter around that area. So spot metering can be really helpful because you can, let's say someone is, you're photographing someone and they do have a backlight, but you don't want to blow them out. So like you could meter, like you could focus right on the person's face, which would properly expose the face, and just apply the rest of the image how it's going to be. So because the camera, we're not taking multiple images here, so it's gonna either like overexpose or expose the background based on someone's face. So that's really helpful if you're in like a tricky lighting situation. Anything that's gonna be like backlit, or when you have like one area like that's got a lot of lights around it and you need to make sure that area is perfectly focused, that's a really good way to do it. All right, and the last one we have is the center weighted metering, and that's just basically it takes the information from the center of the frame and tries to meter around that. So even if we've got light and dark areas like around the surrounding areas of the frame, it doesn't take those into consideration so much. So I hope that helps. I use evaluative metering most of the time, and a lot of the time I'm in manual mode anyway, so that doesn't matter so much. But I'm using evaluative, and then if I do have that tricky time, I'm going to be using the spot metering. So yeah, I hope that helps.
This next one is from Zenavesta on YouTube. They're asking, what is bracketing and what are some of the ways we can use it effectively?
All right, bracketing is really cool, Zenavesta. Bracketing is basically, the idea of it for the most part came about because modern day cameras are incapable really of capturing a huge dynamic range in one frame. So same thing like your eyes. Like if you're in a dark room, sometimes you can't see where you're going. If your eyes were better, you'd be able to see in the dark. Like cats can see in the dark because their dynamic range exists in a different spectrum as ours. So same thing kind of going on with the camera. There are some things that it's just harder for the camera to see, like darks, and it's hard for the camera to see lights. Now you can change your exposure within that, so you can see if something's very, very bright, you can change the camera exposure to be able to see the very bright stuff and also the very dark stuff. But you got a limited range in the camera, so the cameras can't get details from very, very, very dark all at the same time from very, very light. So if you had a dark cave and the sun, you wouldn't be able to see inside all the detail in the dark cave and also see the detail in the sun at the same time with the same exposure. So that's basically just a limitation of the camera. And different cameras have different dynamic ranges. So I think the 5D Mark II has, do you know how many? 13 stops or something?
No idea.
I don't know, we'll put it on this video. 13 to 15 stops I think is about average. So it's basically saying that it can capture from down here to up here. And for the most part, that's gonna do it just fine. But if you are photographing a scene where you have very dark darks and very light lights, and you'd like to capture information from those, you don't want it to just turn black or all the way white, what you wanna do is bracket your shots. So you'll take a shot that's exposed right here for this information, and then you can take another photograph that's exposed for the information that's brighter than that, and then another photograph for this information that's darker than that. And then you want to combine the three of those together into what's called an HDR, or a high dynamic range image. It just takes your dynamic range that your camera actually has and expands that, so you have a higher dynamic range image in the end, which captures more information from the lights and from the darks. Modern day cameras are actually able to do that within the camera software. The 5D Mark II cannot do that. I think the Mark III, it does do that? Okay. Even the iPhones, if you guys have a newer iPhone, the iPhone does that. Click that HDR effect on, and that's exactly what it's doing. It's taking a few pictures and then combining them together to create a final output. So things to keep in mind when you're doing this is it does take 3 different pictures that happen at different times. It's not the 3 pictures are not taken at the exact same time. So if there's movement in the frame, you're gonna get what's called ghosting, where it's not everything lines up. So if you are gonna be doing some of this bracketed shots, try to get your camera on a tripod, and if you're taking pictures of people, just tell them not to move, and you'll be good to go. So there are auto bracketing features built into the camera where you can set it to take a picture brighter, middle, and then lower, or you can just simply do it in manual mode by just changing your exposure. So take a picture, change your exposure, take another picture, change your exposure, take another picture, change your exposure, take another picture, and that's the exact same thing. So I hope that helps, and we've got great episodes on combining multiple exposures here on Phlearn, so we'll link to one of those as well, and you guys can figure out how it's actually done in Photoshop after you're done with the pictures.
Perfect. This next one is from Wang Chu Khan on YouTube. He says, "Hi Aaron, I love your videos because I learn a lot." So his question is, should we always shoot in RAW format or JPEG once in a while? And what are the benefits we can get if we did?
All right, this is another really great question. If you guys are just starting off, this is something that's I hear it addressed all the time, and this is perfect. So I can give a nice long answer to it.
Perfect.
Why not? I'm in a long answer mood today. Okay, so modern cameras like this is a Canon 5D Mark II, just about any digital SLR, something with a removable lens on the front of it, and even some Micro Four Thirds cameras. Even some point and shoots are going to be allowing you to shoot in RAW. And most people are pretty familiar with the idea of a JPEG. A JPEG is like a standard compression that's used to create an image. So most of the images you see on the internet are going to fall into, they're either like PNGs or GIFs, which are like the ones that animate, or JPEGs. And JPEGs are going to be the most common. Okay, so then you have, those are just formats of images. Then you have another format of an image that's called a RAW format, and that's going to be something that you can capture here in the camera. So the difference mainly between a RAW format and a JPEG format is that a JPEG is like a compressed image. It's supposed to be used in its compressed form. So like you, for instance, if you're putting an image on the internet, a JPEG makes a lot of sense because it compresses the information down and it makes the file size really small. So you can put this image on the internet and it doesn't take a whole long time for you to view the image. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the best quality version of the image. It just means that it's a small file size and it is compressed. The information that makes up the image has been compressed. Now, a RAW file is not compressed. This contains all the information for the image. It's a whole lot more information. Now, it doesn't make sense to put that RAW file on like your Facebook or something like that because it's, RAW files that come out of this camera are anywhere from like 13 to 20 megabytes. They're larger files. And that's basically, that's the push and pull. So RAW files have a lot more information to them, but they do take up more space. JPEGs have a lot less information in them and they take up a lot less space. So it really depends on what you're gonna be using these things for. If these are just like snapshots that you're just gonna put on Facebook and like really you're not gonna do anything else with them, JPEGs are totally fine. They're gonna be really less space and you don't have to worry about it. If you're going to be doing images that you plan on editing in Photoshop or Lightroom or things like that, I would highly suggest shooting in RAW because you're starting out with a lot more information. So instead of like starting out with something that's already really compressed and then like trying to work with that, you're just starting out with the best possible version of that file. So really the only downside in my opinion of shooting with RAW is file size. It's just the larger files. If you're shooting action sports, a lot of the times the file size will actually cause like a slower like save time from your camera's like memory to the memory card, and so you'll be able to shoot less frames per second sometimes if you're shooting RAW as opposed to JPEG. I don't imagine that's a huge issue for a lot of you guys, but the file sizes are bigger. So we use mostly like 16 gigabyte memory cards, and that'll hold a couple hundred images. Now, if you're gonna go somewhere and you want to take like 10,000 images, either you're going to take a lot of memory cards with you, or you can shoot in JPEG, which is going to just allow a lot more images to come through on your camera. I've traveled sometimes, and like for images like the beautiful sunset that I'm like, wow, I actually might want to like work with that later. I'll switch the camera to where it's shooting in RAW for a couple shots. But then if it's just like, stupid, like, oh, that's a nice tree. That stuff is totally fine in JPEG. That way you can go on a trip, you can have some of your RAW files, some of the JPEG files on your camera, you can fit a ton more images, and that's the easy way to go. So yeah, if you're shooting for something that's going to be what you would consider relatively serious or something you want to edit, always shoot it in RAW. If it's just kind of like play around, you don't need it to be super great, JPEG is a perfect option.
Awesome.
For our next question, we've gathered a bunch of cameras around us, and it's going to help us better answer the question. So, what's the question?
All right, this question is from Sabir Ali on YouTube. They're asking, what is ISO function and DSLR, on a DSLR camera, and what is the difference between SLR and DSLR?
All right, great question. Now, I'm gonna expand on that a little bit, and we're gonna answer the second question first. This is a DSLR. This is pretty much the most common thing that you guys are gonna see used in the professional photography industry these days. This is D stands for digital, SLR stands for single lens reflex. Basically what that means is when you are taking a picture, light comes in through the lens like this, then there's a mirror that's right down here, and the mirror sends basically the image up into a prism and then out through an eyepiece. So you're actually looking through this eyepiece that is the same thing as what the lens sees. So that's basically the mirror. That's the technology that makes you able to see through the lens. And when you take a picture, the mirror flips up and then your shutter opens and takes a picture here. So that flipping up technology, that's what's going on here in a digital SLR. Now, this is a regular SLR camera. This, you can see, is quite a bit smaller and quite a bit thinner. And the reason is because this takes film. So it's the same idea. You can still, you could put the lenses from an SLR, older lenses, onto a digital SLR. They have convergence and things like that. And I think, oh yeah, show the mirror. I think Nikon even has, like, supposedly all the lenses are interchangeable. They might have changed that, but for a long time, you could use old Nikon lenses even on new cameras. So this is the inside of an SLR camera, and there's a mirror here, which I will flip up. We'll try not to break it. So you can flip up this mirror. You get that? All right, so you can flip up the mirror, and then this is where the shutter is, right behind that. And when you open that shutter for a certain period of time, it exposes light to the film, which is back here in the film gate. And I'm not gonna open that right now, but this is basically where your film goes. So this is an SLR camera. Similar to the technology, it's just completely manual instead of being a digital camera. Okay, then we have a couple other, this is a medium format, old like rangefinder type of camera, in which you don't look through anything. There's no way to look through this lens. What you do instead is you look straight downwards on this other thing. It works in a similar way. There's a mirror right here, and a lens here, and a lens here. So you look.
This is your viewfinder.
Yeah, this is basically your viewfinder. You're looking straight down, which then helps you look through this lens. But keep in mind that this lens does not see exactly the same as what this lens is. So you get like a similar image, but not exactly the same. And this is what's like a rangefinder type of camera. All right, now a modern day equivalent of a range type of camera is gonna be this guy, which is a Fujifilm Instax 210. And we use this in the studio for like parties and events and things like that. Basically, it's like a Polaroid type of camera. The lens, light comes in through here and is exposed to Polaroid type film made by Fuji right here in the back. So you can't see through this lens. So instead, you're looking through the side right here. This is a rangefinder. It just like looks at what is gonna be pointing in a similar place to the lens. But from using this, what you see here is not exactly what you actually get. And that's where the technology's really gotten great with these digital SLRs, is like you're looking through what you're actually gonna wind up seeing in the final image. All right, next we're gonna bump onto our large format, and this is a view camera. Similar idea. Cameras are just boxes that let in light, guys. So we've got a lens on this side, and right here on the back, this is where you put your film. So this opens up and you can put film in there and things like that. Now I haven't used this thing a whole lot or ever, but that's basically how it works. So light comes in one end of the box and then it focuses right here. And these things will also move, which will help you change focus. You can also change the angle. There we go. There we go. You can also change the angle of the focal plane, which will kind of look like a tilt shift type of lens. So this is the advantage of a view camera. You can get images out of a view camera that you cannot get out of a digital SLR, but it's a completely digital camera. And that was another type of camera that just fell. That was an iPhone. All right, so that's what a view camera is. Now we have, we're in the new modern age of what's called a mirrorless camera. So this is a Sony NEX5N. It's got a nice screen that flips out and so fancy. And this is a really cool camera. So when taking a picture on this, there is no viewfinder on this. It's completely digital, and you just simply look at your digital lens. You're looking at the screen as to what's going on, through the lens of the camera. So this is a completely digital camera, and there is no mirror in here. It's also called mirrorless. So it just is what it is. The light comes in here and hits a digital back, and then it's displayed here. So you can't actually see with your eyes what's going on through the lens. So this is kind of like the direction cameras are going in the future, because they're quite a bit smaller and the technology is getting pretty good, where you really can get a lot out of them. So the technology that's in here in this mirrorless camera is the same exact technology that's in a iPhone or any type of smartphone. Basically, it's a digital back. You've got a lens on one side, it's shining, the light comes in, hits a digital back, and then it's displayed digitally on your screen. So similar technology, and it's a brief lesson in cameras. Now, on to your other question. ISO is basically one format of exposure on a modern day camera. It's equivalent to what was known as film speed when you guys were using your SLR cameras and you're shooting in film. And basically it's the sensitivity of, in this case, the sensor, or the olden days, not olden days, it's just different technology, the sensitivity of the film. So you can adjust with your camera, you can adjust your aperture, which is how wide the hole is that lets the light in. You can adjust your time, which is how much time it's letting the light in. And then you can adjust your ISO as well, which just changes how sensitive the sensor is going to react to light. That means if you have a higher ISO, you can have your other sensitives, other options, the aperture as well as the time, be on the lower side because you don't need as much light from those guys because you're making your sensor more sensitive. Or you can do the opposite and make your sensor less sensitive. So it's just one of the components of exposure, and each of these has its own things. And for film cameras, that's going to be the speed of the film, and for digital cameras, that's going to be ISO. So that was fun. I got to play with a lot of cameras. What do you think? Do you have anything to add, Kat?
Oh, you pretty much gave it all.
All right, that is literally all I know about cameras. I hope that helped.
Okay, this next one is from Ran Abner on YouTube. He's asking, when should and shouldn't I use the in-camera light meter?
Okay, the in-camera light meter. Basically, anytime you're taking a picture, you're going to be using the in-camera light meter. Cameras have light meters built into them that sense how much light exists and then changes the aperture and the shutter speed to accommodate for those things. And those are going to be in auto mode and aperture priority and shutter speed priority and program mode. When you're in manual mode, you're still using the light sensor, it's still going to give you an idea, or the light meter, it's still going to give you an idea of whether you're in the proper exposure or not, but it's not going to change any settings for you. So pretty much whether you want to or not, the camera is always using the light meter that's inside the camera. And generally it does a really good job. It's going to figure out about how much light is present and then make a proper exposure for that. If you want to override that, you can totally do that using aperture priority or even shutter speed priority. That's where your exposure adjustments come in. So you can literally just on this camera, it works like this. You can just, are you able to see this? Okay, if I'm in aperture priority and I take a picture and it's too dark, I literally just scroll this to the right here and it adjusts, making the output picture a little bit brighter. That's one stop brighter. I can go even farther and make it 2 stops brighter. Or I can go back the other way and make it a little darker. So this is still, the reason it knows where we are here is because we are in aperture priority mode using the light meter that's built into the camera itself. If you want to go completely manual, you can just do it. And these days, because you are shooting on a digital camera for the most part, if you take a picture and it's underexposed, you just change a setting really quick like I just did, and then take another picture and it's properly exposed. So when you're using film, you don't want to throw away film like that and you can't exactly see what you're doing, but nowadays it's pretty much just take a picture, adjust your settings a little bit, take another picture. It's not going to be the end of the world if you don't get your perfect exposure the first time you're taking a frame. So I really use it all the time. There's an external light meter as well, and we use that sometimes when we're monitoring external lights such as strobes, because the camera can't see those strobes fire because those strobes are firing at the same time when when the mirror is flipped up and we're not actually taking information into the camera itself. It's taking information just straight onto the digital back. So if you are using strobes, that's the time when you can use a light meter, an external light meter, but every other time you're going to be using the light meter that's built into your camera.
Perfect.
All right, cool, good question.
All right, so this next one is from Gregory Alexiv on YouTube. He's asking, how do you use autofocus in the right way?
In the right way. Okay, good question. Autofocus is one of those things that's going to be different for just about every camera and different manufacturers, things like that. Autofocus is just a way for the camera to find your focus point for you. It's like a whole field of knowledge, kind of, and the answer to this question is it really does vary quite a bit. So I shot for years on this Canon 5D Mark II, and the autofocus on this is like okay. Now we're shooting with 5D Mark III, and the autofocus is much better. It just does a better job at figuring out where you might want to focus. There are more points, and you have more control. There are more modes and things like that. So there are a few modes with autofocus. Basically, there's like a single point autofocus where you can just choose your exact point you want to focus on. If you're shooting in any type of auto mode, it's just going to choose that focal point for you. So it's going to just think like, this is probably where they wanted to focus. Let's just do that. And that, most of the time, it's actually pretty good, which is even more amazing, right? When it's just, you let it choose and it's like, oh,
all right, that's fine.
That's probably what they want to take a picture of. It's actually, for the most part, usually pretty spot on. So I don't tend to shoot in autofocus a whole lot, or just like autofocus. Sorry, Chris. I usually shoot in like a single point where I can actually choose the point that I'm focusing on. There are other things like continuous autofocus, in which you can like choose a point, and as long as you keep your finger held down, halfway, it'll continue to change focus until you take a picture. That's really nice if like someone's running or something like that. You can just like track them, and as long as the autofocus point stays on them, even if they're moving like closer or farther from the camera, the autofocus is continuously adjusting to like make sure you're fitting where they're at. So it really depends quite a bit. But if you're just kind of like taking pictures and your subjects are not like moving crazy mouths and things like that, I would recommend like a single point or just completely leaving it on auto. And here in the studio, we use a single point. And if you guys are using autofocus, make sure you switch your camera to AF, or your lens, which is autofocus. You can shoot to M, which will pretty much do nothing for your autofocus, and then you're focusing completely manually. We actually do this quite a bit. Like if the camera's going to be stationary and things like that, we'll do some manual focus. And now the sensors are getting so good, and the like live view and stuff like that, where you can actually like see what you're going to be taking a picture of through the lens, which I know is like, well, my iPhone does that, but it's actually kind of a big deal for this type of technology. So, and you can even zoom in and check your focus and things like that. So it really depends on what you're using your autofocus for, but for the most part, I would say just like that single point and just the auto is where I would leave things.
Perfect.
Well, thank you.
All right. So this next one is from Landscape Artists on YouTube. They're asking, I tried to remove the low pass filter from my Canon 5D Mark III and now it doesn't work anymore. What do I do?
Okay, good question. Sometimes you get the bug to go in and start messing around with your camera gear, and I know I've definitely been there before, and sometimes I break things. So my piece of advice is call Canon up, and we've had cameras where I used tweezers one time to tear the shutter out of a T4i. Like we took so many pictures that the shutter started just getting all weird, and I used a piece of tweezers and actually like yanked a piece of the shutter out of the camera, and it still worked for like 2 weeks, and then it just like completely did not work again. But we sent it back, and then they fixed it. So if there's something going on in your camera where it just doesn't work anymore, things like that, that sucks. But send it back into Canon, and I'm sure they'll fix it. So that would be my recommendation. And maybe if this is something that you want to do, like removing a low pass filter or whatever, but you don't want to like go through the risk of messing it up. I would look online, like a camera shop, or like a professional who's worked on cameras for many years, and someone who just feels really comfortable doing that sort of thing. I don't have a lot of experience doing that, but I would have to imagine that exists.
Yes.
Yes, there's people who do this sort of thing, people who fix cameras for a living. So maybe get one of them to help you out with it. Good question though.
All right. This next one is from Adita Zarfenberg on YouTube. They're asking, can you explain how exposure works? I noticed that changing my exposure settings changes my other camera settings too, and I don't know why.
All right, now this is a great question. It's basically like the basis of what's going on when you guys are taking pictures. So exposure refers to how much light is getting to the camera's sensor, whether that is a film sensor in the case of a camera like this, which takes film, or a digital sensor in a camera like this, which has just a digital sensor that accepts the light. So how much light gets to the sensor is your exposure. Now you can be overexposed, and that means you let in too much light. You can be underexposed, which means you let in too little light. So that's the idea of exposure. It's just how much light is hitting the camera's sensor. Now, there are a couple ways in which you can actually control your exposure, and those are built in with the camera. So the first way we're going to talk about is the aperture. Now, lenses have like these little aperture blades in them that make there's a hole that lets light in through the lens. And your aperture dictates how large or how small that hole is going to be. So to show you, we have this is another lens for this large format here. And I'm going to show you guys what aperture looks like. So we're going to go ahead and open up our exposure, and then I'm going to change my aperture. So right now, we are at the widest possible aperture. It's letting in the most possible light. And as I close this down, each stop is going to close the hole a little bit. And it's letting in less and less light. So if you guys have ever seen your aperture numbers and kind of wondered what those are, they're a fraction of a hole. So somewhere right around here, we're looking. Now this is, keep in mind, this lens is actually going to a completely different type of camera than you guys are used to working with, most likely. But this is going to be letting in your most light. So this is going to be like an equivalent of like an f2.8 or an f4 or an f5.6. As we get smaller, this is going to be like what f16 or f22 looks like. It's just letting in quite a bit less light. And you can imagine that when you have a smaller hole, you let in less light. A larger hole lets in more light. So that part of it is, to me, it just makes a lot of sense because you can actually see exactly what's going on. There's no math or anything like that going on. It's just like, okay, large hole, more light, small hole, less light. So that's what's going on there. That's the first way in which you can control how much light enters your camera, and that is called aperture. The next way you can control how much light enters your camera is through the amount of time that that's open. So that's going to be what's called your shutter speed. So if you have a large hole, like a wide open aperture, you know, something like this, but it's only open for a very short amount of time. So it's like open, close. Then you still only let a certain amount of light in. But if you have a large hole and you keep it open for a long time, and the light continues to gather on the sensor and gather and gather and gather, and then you close it, then you're going to have a lot more light in your camera as well. So the interesting thing about this is you can use those kind of in together with each other. So it's at any point in time you are using both aperture and shutter speed. Whether you know it or not, you are using both of those because the aperture is going to always be present. It's going to change the size of the hole. And to take a picture, you have to use shutter speed because it has to stay open and then close for a certain period of time. So if you want a lot of light in, you can use a wide open aperture, which makes the hole nice and large, and you can use a long shutter speed, which is going to let a lot of light in. If you want a aperture, or if you want an exposure that doesn't let a lot of light in, choose a small hole, something like f16 or f22, and a shorter shutter speed, which is going to let less light in. So times in which you want to let less light in, outside on a very sunny day. You want to shoot with a aperture, like the sunny 16 rule, they say, like shoot at f16 because it's going to let in less light. And you can shoot at a faster shutter speed because there's so much light out there. You only need a little bit of it. You only need it for a short period of time.
And when you hear it, it goes like really fast.
Yeah, it's exactly, it does that. When you take a picture, it should sound like instead of like.
That's for like night scenes
Yep.
or like less light.
Exactly. So when you have less light, you're outside or like you're inside at night or something like if it's dark outside or you're shooting indoors or something like that, there's going to be less light present. So you're going to need to keep your shutter speed open a little bit longer. So you're going to have, instead of a, it'll be like,
Like really slow, depending on what you want.
Depending on what you want.
Light painting.
Oh, light painting is cool.
That's a good one. I did a project on that, and I would leave it open for like 30 seconds.
Yeah,
or,
you
like,
can just
40 seconds. I would just like let it go, and I would just like run around and like paint stuff, and then like you record everything. So it's
Light painting is awesome. And there's also a mode on your camera, this B mode, which I'm guessing most of you probably have really never messed with. And what this does is, as long as I have my finger on the trigger, you can hear that now. And when I let go, it closes the sensor, or it closes the shutter rather. So bulb mode, B or bulb mode, just leaves it open as long as you have your finger on it. So technically you could take a picture for 10 days in a row. Like your exposure could be a 10-day exposure or a 10-year exposure. As long as it's open, it's receiving light onto the film. So those are gonna change. And then the other one is ISO. So we've already covered aperture, which is the size of the hole. We've covered shutter speed, which is how long it's letting light in. And then your last one is going to be ISO, which is how sensitive the actual sensor is on the camera. And a higher ISO will mean a higher sensitivity, which means you won't have to leave your shutter open as long because the sensor is going to be even higher. So these three things work together in conjunction, and you can use them in different ways in different settings. So if you want more light in, you can either increase your ISO, which will let more light in. You can increase your shutter speed, which will let more light in. So make your shutter speed slower rather. And you can make your aperture wider. So use aperture of like 1.4 or 2.0. Those are gonna let more light in. Less light in will be things like shooting at f16, so a smaller hole, a faster shutter speed, so like 1/200th of a second, and you can shoot at a low ISO. And those three things, do you want to get into talking about what each of them does? Yeah, why not? We're already answering this question. So the reason why you would want to work with these three is aperture is the size of your hole. That's gonna see like how much is like your depth of field. So shooting at like 1.4, that's also going to affect your depth of field. Like right now you can see that Kat and I are in focus and our background is out of focus because we're using a wide open aperture. We're letting a lot of light in. So not only does it control light, but it also controls your depth of field. Now time controls light as well, but it'll control how much like motion blur there is. So if you've taken a picture at a party or something like that and things are all blurry, it means your shutter speed was open for too long. That's not going to control your depth of field at all. It just controls how blurry something's going to be. And ISO is going to also control how much light is, but because that is like that's a software type of thing, that's where you get grain. So if you're seeing that you have grain on your images, like they're all grainy and they have a lot of noise, that's because your ISO was too high and you're trying to get too much out of your sensor. So kind of positives, negative each, but all three of them just control how much light hits the sensor, which creates your exposure.
Boom.
Boom.
This next one is from Maxwell Skiddies on YouTube. He's asking, what setting is best for avoiding grain and noise in photos of medium to low light settings, or is shutter speed a more important factor than ISO settings?
Okay, cool, good question. So your grain is gonna be coming from whenever you're using a higher ISO. And when I say higher ISO, it's gonna depend on what camera you're using and where it falls in the range. So for instance, this is a Canon 5D Mark II. It is a full frame camera. It's like one of the higher price point cameras. It's a very nice camera, and but it is a few years old. So with this camera, the range at which you can take pictures, ISO range, that don't have a lot of grain, ISO 100 is going to be like absolutely grain free. And with this one, all the way up to like pretty much ISO 1600 for like casual shots. If these are something like, you know, if these are photos that are going to be very important, I don't take this above ISO 400. That's just kind of like my personal range. But if you're going to be photographing like a concert or something like that, even a camera like this can go all the way up to ISO 1600. It'll look just fine.
I'm sorry.
What are you laughing about?
Freaking brunch thing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Kat just told a story about how she went to like this really important church and then told us that because there was a brunch spot right next door. Yeah, I went to that church. There was a really good brunch spot right next door. It was really funny.
I never went to the church.
She didn't go to the church at all. She just went to the brunch spot next door. So,
Continue.
Oh, I will continue. Basically, that's going to be your ISO range. So anytime you're pushing up like ISO 1000, ISO 2000, things like that higher, you're going to be introducing more and more noise. So if you're shooting with a newer camera that is a higher end camera as well, like a 5D Mark II or a Nikon D800, those cameras are going to do a really great job in not having a lot of noise, even at those higher ISOs. If your camera is going to be a little bit lower on the level, or if it's an older camera, you're going to want to keep those ISOs further down. But my biggest suggestion really is to shoot with a lens that's going to allow a lot of light in, so you don't have to bump your ISO very high. You don't want to always shoot with a long shutter speed because that's going to cause blur, like a blurry face or something like that. So grab yourself like a 50mm 1.4 or a 50mm 1.8. Those are relatively inexpensive lenses that are going to let a lot of light in, and you don't have to really crank up your ISO. So I think the 50mm 1.4 is right around the $400 mark, which for lenses, it's a pretty good deal, and I would recommend that camera day and night, or that lens day and night. It's a great lens. 50mm 1.8, those can be had for like $100 or so, like that. So if you are not shooting in that range, pick up one of those lenses and you're going to see that you can shoot with much lower ISOs, which is going to mean quite a bit less grain and noise on your images. So yeah, hope that helps. And this is, by the way, this is a 50mm 1.4. This is what it looked like olden days. Or this is a 1.8. But anyway, you get the idea. They're small.
This next one is from TechnoFact TV on YouTube. He's asking, what does backlight illumination or BLC mean? I think it means it makes the image brighter, but I can't do that with manual exposure. Can you please explain?
Okay, backlight illumination, that's basically like, it's an exposure type of thing with cameras like the 5D Mark II or whatever. It can sense when there's a backlight. So if there's a lot of light behind someone, it can sense when there's a lot of light coming from behind your subject or whatever. I mean, it does a pretty good job sensing that stuff. It's like, it doesn't have a brain, obviously. It's just trying to figure out based on light patterns and whatnot. But what it's gonna do is it's gonna compensate by bumping your exposure up a little bit. So it will actually wind up properly exposing a person's face, and which will blow out the background a little bit, but at least your person's face will be in focus. If that's something that you don't really want to mess with or you don't feel comfortable using, and you are shooting backlit, meaning there's light coming in from behind your subject, then try something like the spot metering function on your camera, which will allow you to set your metering. We talked about this earlier actually today. Set your metering just on the person's face, and then that will get your proper exposure there, and then just let the rest of the image take care of itself. So yeah, that's what it does, and some ways to use it and not use it.
That is the end of our segment. You asked and we answered, and just wanted to give a big shout out to MavFan1 on YouTube for helping a lot of our fans answer their questions and help them out. So that really helps us too, and like gets everybody engaged. So yeah, I think it's
yeah,
great.
It's awesome. And if you guys are watching these and you see some comments down below, like questions and things like that, and you're like, oh, I know the answer to it. Yeah, like that's a great time to get the conversation started and like getting back and forth and helping out with each other, because we don't know anything or everything. Well, there's somewhere in the middle of those two anyway. And if you guys like these videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have this type of videos where we do question and answers. We do a lot of behind the scenes videos where you can like get an in-depth look at what we're doing on our photo shoots, as well as some wonderful Photoshop videos as well. And share it with your friends. We are going to grow as a community and make these the best we can do so. Thanks a lot for watching, Phlearn guys. We'll learn you later. Bye.
Au revoir.
Kat, this is a DSLR.
What does the D stand for?
I'll show you that later.
Oh.